Excessive hours, too many late nights, working through weekends. Some specialists believe Australian workers have had enough.
Australia is the burnout capital of the world at the moment. How do we know that? Because there are surveys by Microsoft, by McKinsey's, other global organisations which show the hours being clocked up in Australia and the harm that's causing is off the charts.
I think probably employees have been saying enough's enough for a long time, but it's a big step to then say, I'm going to do something about that.
For some time, junior doctors and nurses have been the most outspoken about being overworked. But lawyers, accountants and teachers, as well as public servants, are also documenting their overwork and burnout. Now Parliament is in the spotlight.
This is a case about whether a 70-hour week is lawful under the Fair Work Act.
Josh Bornstein represents Sally Rugg, former Chief of Staff to Teal Independent Dr Monique Ryan. Ms Rugg is suing the MP and the Commonwealth Government, claiming she was forced to work unreasonable hours.
One of the, I think, quite shocking things about this situation is there is no system that monitors the hours of work of parliamentary staffers. Why is that? That's a bit crazy, isn't it?
Dr Ryan has rejected Rugg's claims and is defending the case. Though she declined to comment on the dispute to 7:30, she told Radio in Melbourne,
The situation with Sally was unfortunate. It's a bit of a shame that things have played out in the way that they have. And I can't speak to it in any detail at this point.
Last year, The Australian reported Dr Ryan's concerns that some of her staff were working more than 70 hours, a situation that was unsustainable and not healthy, adding, I think it's only a matter of time before we have a poor outcome with one of our staff members. The Federal Court agreed this month that Ms Rugg's employment could be terminated because her relationship with Dr Ryan had broken down. In July, the court will decide whether Rugg's claims are accepted and whether she should receive compensation for her working conditions. Her lawyer says she was paid a base salary with an additional amount for reasonable additional hours above a 38-hour week.
A contract can't defeat minimum labour standards. So that is no defence to say you signed up to a job when you knew that it was going to be demanding.
Barrister Kate Eastman says excessive overtime is simply unsustainable for workers.
There reaches this sort of crunch time where the impact of that, particularly over a long period, might be different to do like a very short burst of work to achieve a particular outcome or finish a project. But to do that in the long term can be very detrimental, and that's where I think people will get to a point where enough is enough.
Parliament's work culture has already been put under the spotlight by Sex Discrimination Commissioner Kate Jenkins, who made 28 recommendations for improving working conditions.
The Parliament knows there's a problem. It's been put in black and white all throughout the Kate Jenkins report. Long and irregular working hours is causing burnout, is raising the risk of harm, is raising the risk of sexual harassment, of bullying, of alcoholism. It's a mental health, high-risk workplace.
It's a very seductive world. It's a seductive world partly because of the power involved, and that can sound Machiavellian, but what I really mean is you have the power to shift things.
Former political staffer Sean Kelly worked for Labor MPs Nicola Roxon, Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard when Labor was last in government.
The day would start at 6 or before 6, quite often before 6. The last phone call of the day, the last official scheduled phone call of the day would come at 6:30, so you're already talking about a day that's longer than 12 hours. So the workload does end up being pretty insane.
He says the demands of the job and the power imbalance can lead to a difficult work environment for political staffers.
It's very, very hard for staff to push back. You have to remember, many staff are in their 20s, maybe in their early 30s, and they're working for MPs or ministers or shadow ministers or prime ministers for the first time, and they're being asked to do a whole range of things. They have a lot of pressure on them, and the idea of those quite young people with limited experience behind them pushing back against those very powerful, quite famous bosses is an incredibly difficult thing to imagine.
It's no small irony that a Labor government now has responsibility for this dispute. Sally Rugg was a public servant, and Attorney General Mark Dreyfus now has carriage of the case.
I think the issues that arise in this case are issues that we are going to see bubble up to Labor in a whole range of other fields across the next 10 years. And they'd bubble up to any government, but I think there will be extra pressure on a Labor government to deal with them.
Historically, Australia used to set the global standards for working time. It was one of the first countries in the world where the 8-hour day was started. It was one of the first countries in the world to get the 40-hour week.
20 years ago, Professor John Buchanan advised the then Industrial Relations Commission on a test case brought by the ACTU for reasonable hours.
3 million Australians are working more than 45 hours a week, 2 million of them 50 hours a week, and 1 million of them over 60 hours a week. We've got a problem.
For blue-collar workers, a precedent was set last year that 50 hours work in a week was unreasonable. No similar precedent exists for the professional services sector.
Consistently working over 60 hours is recognised as a hazard. Yes, that is recognised as a hazard by the World Health Organisation. The Europeans have looked at this with the working time standard, and they've said basically, you should have an upper limit of around 48.
We have a growing awareness among the employed in general, and certainly among young people, a huge generational shift, seeing that they don't have to take being treated this way, and that the ways in which work has developed over the past decade or two are not necessarily healthy for anyone.
What constitutes reasonable work hours is now in the hands of the courts.
I think we're a long way off one of these cases going to the High Court and getting the High Court with that certainty, but it will happen perhaps over time. So in the intervening time, it's going to be a little bit of a case by case, workplace by workplace, context by context, specific approach to working this out.